Okay. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, joined by Sharon Salzberg. She's the author of the new book called Real Change, Mindfulness for Healing Ourselves, or Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World. Thank you so much for being here, Sharon.
Oh, it's a great delight to be here. It's a great delight to see you.
Yes, yeah. We're living in some wild times, to say the least. We have COVID. We here in the West, in California, we have wildfires, and in Oregon and in Washington, there's wildfires. We have a fight for racial justice on our hands and racial equity. Climate change is impacting us. We have a presidential election coming up in which we have two bitterly divided sides. A lot is happening here in the United States and in the world. So in reading your book, Real Change, I just feel like this is something that is a gift to the world. It's filled with really wonderful teachings about how we can find a sense of peace and balance amidst these difficult times, and how we can help the world from this place of compassion and wisdom. So it's an honor to speak with you today about your book, Real Change. For those of you who may not know, Sharon Salzberg is one of the foremost leading mindfulness teachers in the world. She helped bring mindfulness meditation to the West many years ago, along with Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein. She's the founder of Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, which is where she's joining us from today. She's the author of many amazing books, including one of my all-time favorites, Lovingkindness. I refer to her as the Queen of Lovingkindness often. But she's also written one of my wife's favorite books called Faith. She's written Real Happiness, Real Happiness at Work, and now Real Change. And there's probably 10 more books that I'm not mentioning right now, but she's one of my favorite teachers of all time. Had a big influence on me many years ago. I was living as a monk in a Buddhist monastery, and I asked my teacher, Ajahn Amro, what should I do if I really want to cultivate a sense of love and compassion in a deeper way than what I've been doing? And he said, well, we have some copies of Lovingkindness, Sharon Salzberg's book, in the bookshop. Why don't you check it out? In the library. So I went and grabbed a copy, and I spent 2 weeks on a silent retreat monastery by myself, just me and the book. I had no contact with any other monks. It was just me and Lovingkindness. And I have to say that it was one of the more profound, life-changing, transformative 2 weeks of my life. Sharon just has an amazing warmth in her writing, a sense of realness, which we'll talk about over time, but you're just very real. And it felt like there was this wise elder, very compassionate, warming quality to your writings that helped me find the courage to open up to the pains and sorrows in my own heart, and to be able to hold that with a sense of gentle curiosity and warmth and courage. And it really helped heal my heart immensely, to the point now where I'm able to have more loving relationships with others and with myself. And so for that, I can't thank you enough for how much you've changed my life and what you mean to me personally. And I know this is just a microcosm of your influence on millions of other people in this world. So it truly is an honor to welcome you here. And it's just my mission to help share your message with as many people as possible, especially during these difficult times. So thanks again for being here, Sharon.
Well, thank you. And you always gave me the most beautiful introductions ever. I'm sorry we don't have more occasions where you could introduce me, because it's wonderful just to hear you.
Yeah, well, it's all heartfelt. It's funny, reading Real Change over the last few days. I found myself doing what I always do when I read your books, which is basically I have like a pen and paper nearby to write down anything that I think is worth like remembering or chewing on for later. And with your books, it feels like I'm rewriting the entire book, because like every sentence is so powerfully just, hitting home for me. And so I have pages of notes, and I just found it funny that kind of like doing what I've always done with your books. But I figured we could maybe start with a guided meditation shortly. And in the context of what you're writing about with Real Change and how we can heal ourselves and the world, I just want to offer a quick story that I found very relevant to what I wanted to do a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to lead an online meditation for like Black Lives Matter, and to dedicate a loving kindness meditation for racial equity. And I announced it online. I said, we're going to be doing a loving kindness practice for this issue and for Black lives. And I got a lot of pushback, and it was surprising to me. It was shocking to me how much pushback I received, that people were saying that either, well, all lives matter, or what good can you do with a meditation? What does it mean? Why don't you put this into action? Or this is self-serving in some way. I got many different kinds of pushback, and I was very surprised. And in your book, you actually shared a story that you had a similar experience where you got a lot of pushback from people saying similar things. And I found, you share a couple of tweets that you shared stating some of the context of what you mean, or what your intentions are with the guided meditation, and how it can impact our fight for real change. And so, just quoting you in the book, you say that, and I modified it very slightly, but you say basically that I offer this meditation to remind myself not to disconnect from what is happening. It's so much less painful to look the other way, but this is vital. I would never suggest that meditation, prayer, or positive thoughts are a replacement for action. But I know I need to connect to something bigger repeatedly to have energy to keep acting. And so I feel like that clarification is useful for a lot of us who may not understand the link between our own mindfulness practice and doing this together as a collective community, and linking that to real change. And so I know I've been talking a lot right now, but I have to be very helpful for my own sake, and I feel like that context may be helpful for others as well. And so I invite you to see if you would be comfortable sharing a guided meditation, perhaps anchoring in a sense of belonging for us and welcoming home to ourselves as we get started.
Sure, and maybe I'll just respond to the content of what you said a little bit. The meditation I was proposing on Twitter actually was the suggestion of somebody else, and I thought, oh, this could be really powerful and helpful. So it was metta, METTA, meaning loving kindness, a metta minute for the kids who were in cages in detention centers at the border. And I was actually at an airport when I got somebody put on Twitter the suggestion directed to me, and then I wrote back and said, well, yeah, that's interesting. I'm on my way home. I'll see if I can get a script together and record something. And I did. And it went up a few days later when I was back at an airport. That's where I did my minute. And there was a fair amount of pushback. So it was, just as you said, people saying you're as bad as the people who just do thoughts and prayers and never do anything. And why aren't you donating money? Why aren't you sitting in somewhere? And I said exactly what you read, because it is hard to really bear witness to suffering and have enough energy to want to do something about it. And we see the most caring people who are on the front lines of suffering, whether as caregivers, medical personnel, first responders, who I'm, these days doing a fair amount of work with ambulance drivers, people like that. Or activists who are really trying to create some kind of systemic change is not easy. And we see people burning out left and right because it is not easy. And we need these people. We need really their activity so tremendously. And so I've thought deeply about what helps us keep going, what allows us to sustain a kind of energy or effort when, you don't get immediate results right away, or it's a long haul, of effort. And for me to try to make a difference, and that might mean in your family, it might mean in your neighborhood, it might mean in your community, it might mean in the country, it might mean on the planet. And the manifestation of the effort could be very different. And it's something I really tried to emphasize in the book. That part was based on a conversation I had with Bell Hooks, who's a kind of iconic feminist writer. And I told her, because we're friends, that I'm used to Buddhist scholars who, as you know very well, will parse the exact word and be all fussy and pick it apart and change the vocabulary. And I told her she was even worse, which I think she is, which is probably why she's such a great writer. And she said to me, I was in the process of writing the book, she said, I don't like the phrase social action because I think it sounds like it's only limited to marches and protests and things like that. She said, what about art? What about creativity that takes us beyond the conventional or the convenient and has us dare to imagine something different, dissolves boundaries, So anyway, that's a bigger term than we normally give credence to. And if you are engaged in that way, then I think we really do need practices that will sustain us and will help us keep going. And when you say belonging, the way I am often talking about that precise thing these days is rest. It's some place of awareness where we're not trying to manipulate our experience and we're not trying to fabricate anything. We can just rest. And there we find a sense of home right there. And so this is really embedded in very classical practice as well. And it's a very powerful thing to do. It's also the kind of thing, amongst many things, that we can talk about that feels wrong. It just feels selfish and weird. I can't do that. There's so much happening. It's so urgent. And there is so much happening. And nonetheless, we have to be able to hang in there in a more sustained way. And so the word rest is really very prominent in my own thinking and teaching these days. And it's funny because it is a really classical instruction, rest your attention. Let's say you're using the breath. Rest your attention lightly like a butterfly resting on a flower. And I remember 10 years ago, actually, I wrote a book called Real Happiness, which has a lot of guided meditations in it. And when I turned it into the editor the first time and I got it back, she said, "You're using the word rest a lot. Are you very tired?" And I said, "Well, probably, but that's also the word." So I'd like to have us do a meditation where we are practicing that element of rest and just kind of finding a home in our actual experience. And so very commonly when that's done, as I'm sure many of you know, we choose an object of awareness, we rest our attention on it. When our attention wanders, we see if we can let go and come back. Like no judgment or blame, just see if you can let go and come back. And that home base, that central object, very commonly is something like the feeling of the breath, the actual sensations of the breath. It's always present for us. It's available when we're then out, commuting or whatever, as a place of return. But it doesn't have to be the breath. It may be for physical reasons or emotional reasons. The breath is not serving as that kind of restful place. And so we would then say, well, that's fine. It's not a secondary practice to do something else. Just choose something else, another sensation in your body, something like that, where you don't have to make it happen. It's happening anyway. Okay, so I'll guide it as though it were the breath. And you can sit comfortably, close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. Sometimes we start just by listening to sound. It can be the sound of my voice or other sounds. See if the sounds can just wash through you. Of course, we like certain sounds and we don't like others. But we don't have to chase after them to hold on or push away. Just let them come, let them go. Bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting, whatever sensations you discover. Feel the earth supporting you. Feel space touching you. Bring your attention to your hands and see if you can make the shift from the more conventional level, like, fingers, to the world of direct sensation, picking up pulsing, throbbing, pressure, whatever it might be. You don't have to name these things, but feel them. This is where we rest our attention. And bring your attention to the feeling of your breath. This is just the normal, natural breath. You don't have to try to make it deeper or different. Find the place where the breath is strongest for you or clearest for you. Maybe that's the nostrils or the chest or the abdomen. Find that place, bring your attention there, and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath, just this one. And if you like, you can use a quiet mental notation like in, out, or rising, falling to help support the awareness of the breath, but very quiet. So your attention is really going to feeling the breath, one breath at a time. When I was first practicing meditation, I was so kind of frightened and hypervigilant that I couldn't just be with this one breath. As soon as this breath began, I was sort of mentally leaning forward for the next 50. So I used to say to myself, settle back. Let the breath come to you. I'd also say, you're breathing anyway. All you need to do is feel it, because it's so much performance anxiety. It's like I'd never done it before. Settle back. Let the breath come to you. You're breathing anyway. All you need to do is feel it. And as images or sounds or sensations or emotions might arise, if they're not very strong, if you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. If something comes by and it is very strong, you get lost in thought, wrapped up in a fantasy, or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. We say the most important moment in the whole process is the next moment after you've been gone, after you've been lost. Where you have the chance to let go gently and begin again by bringing your attention back to the feeling of the breath. So we let go and we begin again. However many times you have to do that, that's fine. There's nothing to fight. And right now, there's nothing else to figure out. You can just feel that quality of rest on the sensations of the breath. They're happening anyway. Nothing to shift, nothing to manufacture. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation.
Very much, Sharon. I do want to share that this live session is about 90 minutes long, give or take, and that later we will be fielding questions. So feel free to write your questions in the chat section. We're able to read them and happy to answer those in a little bit. Sharon, a lot's been happening over the last several months. As I mentioned, we have COVID and wildfires and Black Lives Matter and an election and the further destruction of our environment with climate change. And so a lot of people are afraid, or worried. There's also been an increase in a sense of loneliness and isolation, which you talk about extensively in your book. It's even before COVID, there's this epidemic of loneliness, as you put it, and so much suffering. One of the things I really love about your approach and your writings is that you make it clear that it's okay to feel what we feel. And even in that meditation, we're breathing anyway. Our job is just to feel it, to notice it. And, in the midst of everything happening in our world and in our family life and with the economy and many people losing their jobs, there's this increased feeling of anger, loneliness, anxiety, depression. And, I think it would be easy to write a book about real change in the sense that we have to fight and we have to go for our vision at all costs, and we have to do it with a sense of love and peace in our hearts from day one. But that's just not the reality for 99% of us. We have these challenging emotions arising in us, and you make it clear that it's okay to actually be angry. And I was very struck by the section about anger. Anger can actually be a really good thing, or it can be very useful for us. It's not this thing that we have to run away from or smother with love or get rid of, and I think in some Buddhist circles or spiritual circles, there's some contradictory teachings around anger. And you make it very clear it's okay to feel angry. If we don't feel anger, we're not paying attention sometimes. You quoted that quote. And later on in the book, you mentioned that it's also okay not to feel forgiveness right away. We feel like we've been harmed or someone close to us has been harmed. It's okay not to feel the need to cross that bridge too soon. And so there's a lot of this maybe self-judgment around how we should feel versus how we actually are feeling. So could you speak to that that notion that it's actually okay to feel what we feel, even in the midst of fighting for something to be different?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot in there, and that is great. So, first, I should say I don't, generally speaking, choose my book titles, and somehow I got on the real train, with Real Happiness, and then someone else chose Real Happiness at Work and Real Love, and Real Change was actually a joke title for a long time because it felt like, okay, it goes in the sequence. We didn't know what else to call it, and then it stuck. But I'm in many ways appreciating the word real or realistic more than I ever did before. I have a friend, Bob Thurman, who's a Buddhist scholar, and his favorite word is realistic. And I used to hear him and think, that's kind of boring, who wants to be realistic about things? But as time has gone on, I've grown to respect that idea more and more, meaning being in harmony with the truth of how things are. Because anything else is going to disempower us. We're going to be at some weird oblique angle to how things are, and in some state of denial or futile protestation. I don't want it to be this way. Well, this is how it is. And that doesn't mean we get inert or passive or we don't take action. But I think the best place to take action from is in that kind of full acknowledgement of how things are. And sometimes how things are, internally or externally, are full of suffering. And so there's a lot in what you said. First of all, with certain feelings, even in a very classical Buddhist sense, as you know, We don't have to call feelings of greed or jealousy or anger or fear bad or wrong. We can understand them as states of suffering, which they are, and whether it's ours or someone else's. And the states that make our lives, if we are lost in them, and that's sort of the whole point. Feeling something is very different than being overcome by it, defined by it, led around by it. And that's where we have a lot of power and choice, just through being able to pay attention in a different way. I think it's kind of unjust to oneself and even cruel to say, well, I shouldn't feel this. I shouldn't be afraid anymore. I should have stopped grieving long ago. I should be beyond this. I've been meditating now for like 7,000 years. Why do I still feel this? Which makes no sense, because we feel what we feel. When conditions come together for something to arise, it will arise. We can affect those conditions for sure, but we can't absolutely control them or dominate them. And our real power lies in what do we do with something when it's come up. And anger would be a really good example of that. It's a complex feeling. It's not a simple thing. We feel what we feel, and we have to allow every feeling the dignity of its presence, and recognize, okay, this is what's happening right now. Something like anger is usually very layered. And if we can be mindful of it and pay attention to it without either condemning it or ourselves, or just saying, yes, I'm going to do this vengeful thing and then that, we learn a lot. I've seen, sitting with anger, the layers of sadness, the layers of fear. And almost always in there's like a kernel of helplessness. In Tibetan Buddhism, they say anger is what we pick up when we feel weak because we think it's going to make us strong. And its strength is the energy. There's a kind of cutting through energy of anger, which is very needed, actually. And we know sometimes in a meeting, in a gathering, remember when we used to have gatherings, sometimes it's the angriest person in the room that is insisting that everybody looks at that problem, and everyone else is kind of studiously looking the other way, not wanting to face it. And they're saying, no, look at that. So we actually rely on that cutting through energy. But when a person is consumed by it or overcome by it, when it really becomes kind of a way of life, it's very destructive. And the Buddhist psychology talks about anger as being like a forest fire, which burns up its own support. It can destroy the host. And like a fire, it can range very wild and we might end up someplace we actually don't want to be. So the big question for us becomes, how do we harness the energy of it? That kind of cutting through possibility without getting consumed by it. Now, this is not easy, but it's actually almost like a characteristic of mindfulness that it helps us do that. And I, use the words and testimony of a lot of activists in the book about their own experience of just that. And in fact, when I was writing the book, I thought, what would be cool is to quote Gandhi for saying, and again, this is not putting ourselves down effort for what we feel, but it's the difference between feeling something and being lost in it. So I thought, I can use that Gandhi quote where he said something like, being lost in anger is like drinking poison and thinking it's going to kill the other guy. So then I looked it up because I wanted to put it in the book, so I had to source it. And I never saw it attributed to Gandhi at all. I saw it attributed to the Buddha and Oprah Winfrey and the Big Book of AA and Carrie Fisher and Nelson Mandela. I have no idea who said it, but it's very wise. So it's not because what we're feeling is bad or injudicious. It's because out of compassion for ourselves, we decide, do I want to get dedicated to this and just keep getting overcome by it, or do I want to find another way? The other way is not dismissing it, but utilizing the energy of it. And forgiveness is a whole other topic, which is also very complex because we tend to use the word in so many different ways. One of our friends, Sylvia Borstein, used to say, forgiveness is not amnesia. It doesn't mean, you're wiping the slate clean and that what happened didn't matter or doesn't matter. Maybe it matters quite a lot. But again, it's a sense of being consumed, overcome, defined by, say, either our own actions in the past, if we feel we can't forgive ourselves, or someone else's actions, which we actually cannot change. As one of my friends who describes himself, I never say anything about my friends that they don't say themselves, by the way, and publicly, so because I use that term a lot. One of my friends who describes himself as a kind of obsessive type who just like gets consumed by things, especially maybe the wrong actions of others and a sense of grievance and so on. He said once, I think this is actually an AA slogan, he said, I let him live rent-free in my brain for too long. You know, so here again, it's a sense of compassion for ourselves and give yourself a break, you know, like, and just kind of change channels a little bit. But that doesn't mean neglect what happened. And there's a very interesting conversation I have in the book where I do interview a lot of people. This is a conversation with Tim DeChristopher, who's an environmental activist, who I was following online long ago. He did an act of civil disobedience that was quite nonviolent and ended up in prison for 2 years for it. And everyone was startled that that was the sentence. And when he got out of prison, he went to Harvard Divinity School. So I was very interested in him. And he was on my podcast one day. That's where we did the interview. And he was saying, you know, if you've been really hurt by someone, like directly, and it's really impacted you, your job is not necessarily right then to forgive them. Your job is to survive. Or maybe your job is to grieve. And he proposed a compassion core, that it might be someone else's job to be generating compassion for this person, not to make believe it doesn't matter whatever it was they did, but because that is actually considered, you know, in some ways, that's the kind of energy that can actually go toward restoration of harmony, that can actually help somebody move out of their own contracted state of causing suffering and into a better place. And so I thought that was a really novel idea, kind of like the Peace Corps. We could have a compassion corps.
Yeah, and it takes a village, and we don't need to shoulder that ourselves right now, so to speak. And yeah, you know, and you have a very wonderful quote in there about compassion. You know, a lot of us, or some people, have the misconception that compassion means that we're soft, or that we don't fight, or that we maybe are allowing of everything, and we condone everything and are just kind of nice all the time. But you say that compassion doesn't mean we don't fight. It means we don't hate. And, you know, and so we can continue being compassionate as we fight for change. It's how we relate to the fight that really is the difference. And compassion, as you share so often, you know, is love in the midst of suffering. And you know, a lot of us struggle to hold a sense of love for ourselves during these times, or for others, especially for people who we disagree with or feel like are harming us in some way. So would you be open to sharing a brief loving kindness meditation for us to help us to cultivate that sense of care and compassion in our hearts in the midst of these difficult times?
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, love can have different flavors, and none of the flavors are weak or saccharine or sentimental, which is easy to believe they are. But there's a flavor which has to do with just, it's not even an emotion necessarily. It's a sense of inclusion. It's recognition that our lives are connected, that construct of self and other and us and them that we live by is really just a construct. And it might be useful in certain circumstances, but it's just a construct. And the reality, going back to the word real, is that our lives are interconnected. So you might not like somebody at all, but there's a kind of bone deep recognition that our lives have something to do with one another. And it's moving from self and other to more a sense of we. And that is actually an interesting place to be looking at problem solving. Not that you need to convert somebody to your view, which may be impossible, or think that all views are equal, which I actually don't believe is true. Some are very diluted. But in the sense of care for the person, there's much more of a recognition. And I use the example in the book of one of my favorite little stories, which is I was riding in a car with a friend, and we were stuck in this incredible, terrible traffic and complained bitterly about it the whole time. And then my friend looked at me and said, well, we're the traffic too, you know. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. It's like that presumption, I mean, that it really is a state of privilege, that presumption of centrality. Like, it's my road. You are an interloper in the way, slowing me down, you know, get out of the way. But what about when that centrality, which is a mistaken notion, drops away? And it's like, oh, we're all the traffic. That is actually realistic. That's the truth of life. And there's something that echoes in loving kindness for somebody in that sense. You know, we're not saying we like them, we approve of them, we want to spend any time with them. We're not going to fight their agenda. It's none of that. But we have that sense of linkage. And I try to use that in a lot of different ways. Like, often going into an organization or going into a company to teach, I will say to people, how many other people need to be doing their job well for you to do your job well? Because in fact, we feel so independent. It's part of why we feel so lonely. But in truth, we are relying on so many people. And we're relying on people we normally might ignore or disdain or objectify in some way. Like, I was talking to a doctor who's the head of this big medical practice in the hospital, and he said, you know who I'm really starting to appreciate in a whole other way is the cleaning staff. And I thought, yeah, you know, like, isn't it true? Or I was recording a meditation on loving kindness, and maybe we'll include some of this in the one that we do for this journal. And so they chose a meditation out of the book. And when we do loving kindness practice, we silently repeat certain phrases that is really the resting place for our attention. And the phrases are meant as like gift giving or offering. May you be happy, may you be safe, something like that. And we go through these various categories of recipients for that offering, beginning with ourselves. And then, depending on how much time we have, you know, maybe somebody we really are grateful to, and onward. And then we come to this category known as the neutral person. So the neutral person is someone we don't especially like or dislike. It's someone we feel kind of neutral toward or indifferent to, usually. And very often we suggest that you choose someone in your life that you're bound to run into now and then, because you may not feel much difference in your actual formal meditation, but you'll notice a difference after a while when you do see them. So probably for 45 years, my colleagues and I have been saying, like the checkout person in the supermarket, they're the perfect person. We don't care anything about them usually. We look right through them. We're completely indifferent to them. So I was reading this out loud. It was being recorded by this journalist, and I went, whoops, look at that, you know? How do we think we get to eat, you know, like, really? And so that sense of inclusion is really at the heart of loving kindness. And that can happen even without liking somebody, that recognition, okay. And then also the flavor of loving kindness that is compassion, I think, can really happen for some of these people that we really dislike, which doesn't mean giving in, and it doesn't mean, getting all woo about it. But again, it's that obsession with their faults. And sometimes I think, in all honesty, um, imagine living a life where you make some choices, or maybe many choices, so that you're so reviled by so many people that if they heard you had a terminal illness, they'd rejoice. I think, what a life, and what a waste of a life, when I really believe as human beings, we are capable of greatness, just like an ordinary human being. We're capable of greatness of heart. And to become that small and contracted and divided and separate and cruel, I think, I do feel compassion, which I don't feel weakens me in any way. I don't think it holds me back in any way. So why don't we do some loving kindness practice? And of course, it'll be rather brief and somewhat truncated in how many beings we can make this offering to. I say beings because it might be like a puppy, it may not be a human being, but we'll do a little bit together. So if you want to sit comfortably again, close your eyes or not. Just let your energy settle into your body. And again, instead of resting our attention on the feeling of the breath, in this practice, we rest our attention on the silent repetition of certain phrases. And since the first recipient is ourselves, phrases like, may I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. Live with ease means in the things of day-to-day life, like livelihood and family, may not be such a struggle. May I live with ease. People always say to me, who am I asking? We're not asking anybody. We're gift giving. We're offering. It's like you hand someone a birthday card and say, may you have a great year. May you be safe. May I be safe. So you can use these phrases or any 3 or 4 phrases that make sense to you, that are big enough so you can make this offering to yourself and then to others. And just gently repeat them over and over again with enough space and enough silence so that it's a rhythm that's pleasing to you. You don't have to conjure up any special feeling or emotion. The power of the practice is in the complete wholehearted gathering behind one phrase at a time. May I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And again, the skill set is the same. If your attention wanders, as it likely will, you go to the past, you go to the future, you're all over the place. It's okay. You realize that, see if you can gently let go. Just bring your attention back, in this case, to the phrases. And see if you can bring to mind what we call a benefactor. That's someone who's helped you. Maybe they've helped you directly. They've helped pick you up when you've fallen down. Or maybe you've never met them, but they've inspired you from afar. Could be an adult, could be a child, could be a pet. I've often these days used a puppy, actually, because my friends adopted a puppy, and as a family, I see them much happier than they were before. Buddhist texts say this is the one whom, when you think of them, you smile. So, is there someone who makes you smile? And if so, you can bring them here. Get an image of them or say their name to yourself. Get a feeling for their presence. And offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. Even if the words don't seem really perfect, they're carrying the heart's energy, and so they're serving us as a vehicle. May you be safe. Be happy. Be healthy. Live with ease. And for a little bit, see if one of those neutral people comes to mind. Checkout person in the supermarket, post office delivery person, someone that you see now and then who serves a function in your life. And if somebody like that comes to mind, you can bring them here. You may not know their name, but you could just get a feeling for them and see what happens as you offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. Even not knowing their story or anything about them, we can believe that everybody actually wants to be happy in the sense of a sense of belonging, a feeling at home somewhere in this world. We're not so different. And everybody, while we don't share the same measure of pain or suffering, we do share this kind of incredible vulnerability that life can just change on a dime. Look at where we are, it's so insecure. And so it's in that spirit that we offer loving kindness to this person. And then we're going to have a gathering, just whoever comes to mind. Friends, family, colleagues, neutral people. Just see who pops up. Puppies. And we'll offer loving kindness to the collective. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And then all beings everywhere, all people, all creatures, all those in existence, near and far, known and unknown. May all beings be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the session.
Thank you, Sharon. I have one final question before we open it up to the comments, assuming we have some time. Actually, one of the comments is from Kim. What are some suggestions for empaths? And you know, in your book, Real Change, you make the distinction between empathy and compassion, and talk about maybe the misnomer that it's what we often call compassion fatigue is actually empathy fatigue. Empathy can kind of be like feeling with and taking on some of the energy of what's around us. Whereas compassion is a bit more about feeling for. There's this offering or extension of care for the other, and which includes ourselves as well, obviously. And we can form healthy boundaries out of a sense of compassion as well. You also share that the near enemy of compassion is a sense of burnout, feeling overcome by the amount of suffering there is in the world, or for those who we care about. And so when we're burned out, when we're overcome, we can't serve. Now, that near enemy of compassion is not compassion itself. It's something that we mistake for compassion. But that sense of compassion, that feeling for others, the genuine sense of care and love that we were just doing through that meditation, you know, it can feel a lot. You know, a lot of us who are in caring professions or who are caregivers, even if we have, you know, pure compassion, it's still a lot to be extending that care. And so in your book, Real Change, you talk a lot about this intersection between compassion and equanimity.
Mm-hmm.
You share that equanimity helps to balance our care so that our compassionate action can be sustained in a way that we're not always burned out. This equanimity can help us to not drown under the weight of our own worry. And so I've always found equanimity and the intersection between equanimity and compassion to be very difficult to teach. And that said, in the last chapter of your book, Real Change, which I hope everyone buys 10 copies of, you do a great job of explaining that intersection between compassion and equanimity, and how equanimity can fuel us to care for others in a sustainable way, where we're not feeling burdened. In the On page 221 of the hard copy, you share a few equanimity phrases with us that we can reflect on and meditate on over time.
I'm going to look them up.
Yeah, and so I'll just read a few of the phrases just to
Good.
give people a taste of this intersection between balance, this feeling of equanimity, and compassion. I care about your pain, yet I cannot control it. I will care for you and cannot keep you from suffering. May I offer love, knowing I can't control the course of life, suffering, or death. I wish you happiness and peace, yet cannot make your choices for you. I will work to alleviate suffering in the world, and I know I'm not in control of the unfolding of the universe. You talk about how equanimity is this broadening of perspective, rooted in care and wisdom. It's all about balance. And you talk about how with climate change, there's so many pieces to the puzzle, and it can feel very heavy. But if we bring a broader perspective to the forefront, that can help us to push for change in a sustainable way with more balance. I know this is a long-winded question, but climate change is an enormous challenge. And personally, when I think about climate change, it can feel overwhelming very quickly, just through the enormity of it. And through equanimity, I try to broaden my perspective, and yet sometimes that perspective isn't even broad enough to kind of encapsulate climate change, because climate change can itself feel so big. I hope this is making sense so far. So when you reflect on climate change and the enormity of it, I'm just curious personally, like how you bring this sense of compassion and equanimity to be able to hold it within a wider perspective without getting overwhelmed by it, and how what that means to you and how you relate to the enormity of it.
Well, I'm actually going to do a sort of lateral shift from climate change, in talking about equanimity at first. And I also want to say that I try not to I use them all the time, but I try not to use words like maintain or keep, because I don't think it's going to happen. That very first lesson in meditation, your mind's going to wander. You can let go and start again, I think is the most important lesson of all. Because people say that to me all the time. I just did an evening with somebody, theoretically in Berkeley, although of course I was sitting right here. And the question was, how do I keep faith? And I said, well, you're not gonna, like we're all going to lose it. We're going to lose it periodically, sometimes a lot, but we can start over. And that's what resilience is. And that's very, very important as a point. So equanimity is a really tough word to understand. It sounds to us like indifference and not caring and things flattening out or being oblivious. And it doesn't mean any of that. It does mean balance. And some of that balance comes, it's exactly like you said, it's being able to hold many things at once, like the joy and the sorrow and the devastation and the possibility. And being able to be in touch with, acknowledge fully both. And so the example I'm using these days, for the book launch, I did this series of 4 events, which are now up on Wisdom 2.0's YouTube channel. And
I'm posting a link to that right now, actually.
Okay, so one of the events was me moderating a panel with people who had survived in some way and been strongly, strongly affected by the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, some years ago. And I've been going down there and teaching in that community. And also, we hosted a retreat here in Barrie for survivors of gun violence. And some people had a child killed. Some people had been shot themselves. Some people were teachers, say at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, were there that day. Or this young woman who I use as an example in my book was on this panel, and her mother is a teacher at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. She was there that day. She wasn't hurt, but it had been like 8 hours or something of not knowing if her mother was alive. And then this young woman, Samantha is her name, who's an extraordinary young woman, just a recent graduate herself, became very active in helping organize the community, especially the community of students and the marches and so on. And so the first time I went down there to teach was not so very long after the shooting. And Samantha raised her hand at one point. She said, I feel really weird because I'm having this incredible experience being here. And I know the only reason this day is happening is because that horrible thing happened. And I don't know how to get over it in order to really appreciate this. And I said, I don't know that we ever get over it, but we learn to hold them both at once. So the other day on the panel, I said to her, do you remember that exchange? And she said, not only do I remember it, I think of it every single day. I think about equanimity. I think about the yin and the yang, the dark and the light and the dark. And she said, it's like her North Star. And I think that is the reality. We don't get over it, and we don't sort of only see the bright side, of things. There's such tremendous suffering. And when you listed so many of the things between climate change and the economy and the pandemic and racial injustice, there's so many things, and we need to be able to acknowledge that. But if that's the only place we see, no sense of possibility, no sense of beginnings, no sense of onward movement, then we will despair. And there's such a huge amount of depression and despair, also and exhaustion going on right now. But if we only look at, things can work out this way, and there's creativity and there's this, then we're so ungrounded that it's not realistic. So we need to learn to hold both, and we can learn to hold both. I think, in reference to one of the questions that's in the chat, we can't take everything into our heart. Like, we just can't. Like, the immensity, the enormity of climate change. But we can take in that which we feel passionate enough about to act on. Because the most corrosive feeling of all, I really do believe, is that sense of helplessness or hopelessness. So maybe within that enormity, there's one issue that you would really engage in. For me, the overarching issue I am passionately involved in more than anything is voting right now. If you are a U.S. citizen and you are 18 years old and eligible to vote, I think it's imperative. And so the work that I do, like writing letters and doing this, or even in talks like this, is very much centered around that. And I know there are a million activities I'm not engaged in. And it's not that I don't care, but this is the one where I feel like a sense of focus and commitment, and I can actually do. Because remember, the word is real. Like complaining on Twitter, or feeling horrible because something is going on is kind of not the point. It's being able to metabolize that distress and move it into action. And so that's the arena where I really work. And for me, it's so consonant, with a background in kind of Buddhist training in a very classical sense, although not monastic, it is so consonant, that action of voting, with the Buddhist teaching about the innate worth of everybody, that everybody has worth, everybody has innate dignity. And so that translates to me as everyone should have a voice and everyone should get to exercise that voice. And so I feel really happy. And so that's part of holding it all. There's the devastation and the distress. And then there's the sense of community and, the goodness that exists. There's some, I have to look it up to get the exact numbers right, but it's not far off from what I'm about to say. There's some school in, I think it was Minneapolis, that was serving as a kind of distribution center for poor families and people who needed food. And they put out a call for something like 7 bags of food, and they got 20,000. And I think about that. I have to get the exact numbers right, but it's close to that, and if not that. And I think about that, and I think, oh, that's true too. That also exists, even as this other, the cruelty and everything that we see, even that as that's going on. So I would take that section of what seems so wrong, see what we can act on and will act on, and also be buoyed up by the force of goodness.
Beautiful. Well said. Thank you, Sharon. Sharon, I'm just very grateful for your time today. I really appreciate the meditations that you've shared. I really think that Real Change is just a profound book. Nothing else quite like it that I've read. Very practical, very uplifting, very real. And I encourage people to check it out. I've been listening to it on Audible as well as reading the printed book. I think both are great. For those of you who have been impacted by Sharon in some way, who have benefited from today's teachings, I encourage you to share your generosity with Sharon. I posted a link to a place where you can contribute to her directly. She's a full-time Dharma and meditation teacher. This is all she does. And her life is sustained by contributions from people like you. So I do encourage people to click the link, SharonSalzberg.com/contribute, where they can contribute. I do want to just acknowledge one of the comments. What do we do about our own triggers when we still have some unhealed trauma? And so I posted a link to David Trelevin's website, who wrote the book Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness, which is a guide on how we can heal safely through our own window of tolerance. So I do encourage you to check out his free monthly webinars. He has a wonderful book and some free teachings out there. Paul Reitman, I just want to acknowledge your question about how do we know what to focus our action on. Sharon did touch on that in the book. Sharon, do you have any pithy suggestions on that?
Well, that was what I was referring to when I said, what can I and will I actually act on?
Yeah, and what boys? Yeah, great. Sharon, as a parting gift, I do have a gift for you, but I ask that you choose my left or my right.
Right.
My right is the Statue of Liberty Lego set.
Oh my God, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
I don't know what was on left because we're that kind
of... left one is a gyroscope.
Oh no, that would be great too. But I write about both in the book, so they're both book references. But
exactly.
I'm a big fangirl of the Statue of Liberty. I don't have a gyroscope, but like.
Well, maybe I'll send a couple for you of each. Yeah, for those of you who want to be on the inside joke, read Real Change, out now. Sharon, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for offering this gift to the world. I can't thank you enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Really, thank you all.
Absolutely. All right. Take good care, everyone. Bye-bye.